I live alone in a stabilized walk-up in Astoria, Queens, the kind of place where the radiator hisses in winter and the hallway smells like fresh coffee after 7 a.m. On an ordinary Tuesday at 5:02 in the morning, someone pounded on my door hard enough to wake the building. When I opened it, my quiet next-door neighbor, Gabriel Stone, stood there with his breath steaming in the cold. He wasn't the type to talk. We'd traded maybe 20 words in a year. But he looked past me, not at me, and said, low and urgent, "Don't go to work today. Stay home. Trust me." When I asked why, he glanced down the stairwell like he expected to see someone coming up and said, "You'll understand by noon," then walked away without waiting for me to reply. I'd never seen him rattled. It felt like seeing a statue blink. I'm Alyssa Rowan, 33, financial analyst at Henning & Cole Investments on 6th Avenue in Midtown. I don't miss work. I don't invite drama. 3 months earlier, my dad died from what the hospital called a stroke. In the week before it happened, he kept trying to tell me there was something about our family I needed to know. Something he'd been protecting. We never got to that conversation. After the funeral, odd things kept happening that I wrote off as grief. A black SUV idling on 31st Street longer than made sense, blocked numbers that hung up when I answered. My younger sister calling from overseas to ask, a little too casually, if I'd noticed anyone new on my block. I convinced myself I was seeing patterns where there were none. And then my neighbor showed up before sunrise and told me not to leave the apartment. At 7:15, I texted my manager that I had a personal emergency. Make it logical, I told myself. If Gabriel's wrong, I can apologize. If he's right, I get to keep breathing. From 8 to 11, the place felt too loud. The fridge hum, the tap in the bathroom I hadn't turned tight enough, the wind testing the fire escape. I kept checking the time like I could slow it down by watching. At 11:32, my phone rang from an unknown number. The voice said he was Officer Taylor with NYPD and asked if I'd been informed there was a critical incident at my workplace. My mouth went dry. He said there was footage of my car pulling into the West 44th Street garage at 8:02 a.m., my keycard badging in, and a witness who saw me on the 3rd floor before the attack. I told him I'd been in my apartment all morning. He asked if anyone could verify that. I looked at my quiet living room and said no. He told me units were on their way and that I should not leave the premises. His tone was polite and careful in the way you use when you've already decided how the story ends. Before I could think of what to do next, someone knocked again. Not frantic, not friendly, just deliberate. Gabriel's voice through the door, "Open up, we need to talk." I didn't undo the chain. I asked how he knew the police would call me. He said, "Calm now, because they're not coming to help. They're coming to hand you to federal custody. You weren't supposed to wake up in your own bed this morning." I cracked the door. He stepped inside, locked it, and scanned the street through my kitchen window like he'd practiced the motion 100 times. He said the incident was staged to erase witnesses and make me the face of it. They needed me alive long enough to confess to something I didn't do. When I asked why me, he said the sentence that split my life in two. "I didn't move next door by accident. Your father asked me to watch you." He slid a small black envelope across my table. My father's handwriting on the flap. Inside, a note I felt before I read. "If you're reading this, what I feared has started. You're not in danger because of what you did. You're in danger because of who you are. Do not surrender. If they take you in, you disappear. Trust Gabriel as you would trust me." I stood still for a long moment, like my body needed time to catch up to the words. Gabriel told me my father had uncovered a classified biogenetics program tied to old money and federal doors, a public private machine that had been declared dead on paper and kept breathing off books. He said my father refused to cooperate and that his death wasn't natural. From his jacket, he pulled a metal keycard stamped with a red emblem. "This opens a vault your dad used," he said. "It holds the names and the money and the backups. If we get there before they get to you, the truth doesn't die." The sirens I'd been waiting for finally brushed the edge of the block, then cut off. No need for the show when you're only here to retrieve property. We took the stairs 2 at a time and cut through the deli on Broadway to the back door, then into a rideshare headed south like any other early lunch ride. On the Queensboro Bridge, with the river flashing between beams, Gabriel handed me a tablet already open to a profile I didn't know existed. Rowan, Alyssa, Subject 7B, Designation, Genomic Asset, Project Origin Initiative. Notes, Gene Expression Anomalies, Blood Markers Not Found in the General Population, Documented Immunity to Multiple Viral Strains, Potential Regenerative Properties, Approved for Phase Roman 2. The words read like a translation of a language I'd never learned but somehow understood. 20 years ago, Gabriel said, my father saw tests in my childhood records he hadn't approved, samples logged where they didn't belong. He pulled me from every clinic he could and followed the paper. He found Origin. He went to an oversight board. The board closed it on paper. The people running it kept going. They made the stroke look natural. Gabriel said, "It wasn't. I asked why stage an attack at my office. He said my recent blood work, routine corporate wellness I'd barely noticed, had triggered a system alert. Today was asset recovery. If I went to Midtown, I'd be dead or disappeared. If I stayed home, they'd brand me dangerous and bring me in publicly. Cameras buy more compliance than handcuffs. They didn't just want my body. They wanted the story of my body told in their voice." We left the FDR and cut across Randall's Island, then east toward a maintenance road by Flushing Meadows I'd never noticed, past a fence that looked older than the park. A low door under a hill opened into cold air, and a steel corridor with the hum of old power. The deeper we walked, the more something in me settled, like my body had been here before even if my mind hadn't. A vault door waited with a version of our family crest etched into it. Gabriel said it would recognize my father's bloodline. I pressed my palm to the scanner, and a line of light moved across my skin like it had been waiting years to do that. The vault opened onto shelves of black cases, and at the center, a glass pedestal holding a leather journal I knew as soon as I saw it. My father's first page told me I wasn't their product. He said I was evidence that immunity could appear on its own, that what scared them wasn't what they'd done to me, but what they couldn't take credit for. The second page said there were 2 options at the far console: surrender to acquisition or release everything to the public and accept the cost. I walked to the terminal. 2 buttons glowed under glass. If I surrendered, I might keep breathing behind glass. If I revealed, I'd make enemies who already killed quietly. I pressed revelation. The room answered with a low hum and a countdown while encrypted files jumped to outlets and boards my father had primed. A route that didn't look dramatic on a screen but felt like opening a window in a room that had been sealed too long. Somewhere above us, an alarm woke up. We left by the opposite tunnel and came up into daylight that felt colder than night. My phone buzzed. A processed voice said the leak wouldn't save me. It would make me an accelerant. When I asked who it was, the line clicked. On my screen, reporters started posting fragments. Not enough to tell the whole story, more than enough to make it a rumor you could touch. Origin wasn't a ghost anymore. It was a breadcrumb trail. My face was the crumb they wanted to sweep first. We ditched the car near Roosevelt Island, took the tram, then the subway, then a walk through streets people use when they're not being watched. In a storage unit off 11th Avenue, Gabriel pulled old monitors to life and dragged the Midtown garage footage into focus. My car rolled in at 8:02 a.m. He enlarged the reflection in a glass panel, a woman's profile that would pass for me if you didn't know me, the wrong posture, the wrong left-hand grip. A freeze of the security turnstile showed a wrist that looked like mine, except for a faint scar I don't have. They didn't steal my identity. They built a mirror good enough to fool cameras, good enough to steer witnesses. Perfect for panic, my sister called at last. She told me not to go back to Astoria. They'd flagged my building. The cop who called me wasn't NYPD or county, she said. He worked internal security for the program's private arm. She knew because, overseas, she'd worked under a partner program that called itself resilience profiling, identifying blood anomalies for outreach. She didn't know what it really was until she saw my code in a training deck, 7B. I didn't ask why she hadn't told me sooner. We both knew the answer. She'd tried in the only safe ways she had. I asked her to trace who was shaping the media narrative. She promised to try and warned me they'd come for anyone who helped me if this got louder. Then we agreed it had to get loud enough that they couldn't isolate us one by one. Back at the vault, there had been 2 buttons. But my father left one more thing no one would find unless they loved paper the way he did. In the back cover of the journal, in a shallow cut, a thin strip of vellum with a sequence of numbers and a line, 7 wakes when the light breaks. I entered the numbers on the tablet, a 3rd panel opened, distributed wake protocol, not a single dump but 7 caches in 7 jurisdictions, asleep until proof crossed a replication threshold. Not clicks, adoption. When the light broke, when enough separate places carried the story on their own, all 7 would wake and push corroboration into universities, foreign papers, medical boards, and a few wild cards who hate being lied to more than they like being paid. You don't push it directly. You make the world push it for you. We holed up in a small apartment in Jackson Heights while the first wave of the leak spread. Predictably, the counterattack landed. Financial analyst linked to Midtown attack. My photo. My building. Panel shows asking why an innocent person would run. Then bot swarms pushing fake lab shots, and the word unstable like it was a diagnosis. If they could convince enough people I wasn't quite human, anything done to me would look like control, not cruelty. I remembered my father's line, "You weren't born to be controlled. Reveal what control is." So we recorded a simple statement at the kitchen table with a lamp and no theatrics. I said I was at home at 8:02 a.m., that my keycard had been cloned and my car mirrored, that my father was murdered with a toxin designed to look like nature. I showed the turnstile wrist without my scar. I showed the vendor IDs that turned into shells that turned into a fund with my firm's name on it. We posted in the places their bots don't swim well: Spanish, language communities in the Bronx, nurse groups around Elmhurst and Bellevue, academic circles that care more about footnotes than hashtags. It didn't go viral. It took root. That's what 7 was listening for. Exactly at noon, the tablet chimed. Wake 1 of 7, then 2, then 3. A foreign oversight committee posted a PDF with the origin letterhead I'd seen in the vault. University servers in 2 time zones put up anonymized datasets that matched the internal notes. A network of clinicians published charts they'd been sitting on for years. The light broke. The lock on our apartment door clicked. A woman's voice on the other side said her name was Noor and that she was alone. Through the chain, I saw one person with empty hands and eyes that had read more than most people ever would. She held up an antique signet with the Rowan crest and said our crest wasn't just family art. It was a seal used by a consortium older than agencies that believed immunity should be learned from. Not owned. She said she didn't work for them. She worked for herself. But she hated thieves who call themselves doctors. She laid out the ladder above origin, labs and charities at the bottom, oversight boards in the middle, and at the top, a syndicate older than any department that once funded studies. In the name of philanthropy and learned the wrong lesson, they didn't fear my blood. They feared proof they weren't necessary. She pushed a drive across the table with two names that mattered. Director Hale, who ran the data, and Arden Cole, who paid for it. Cole, as in Henning and Cole, the firm where I worked. I'd been sitting inside the machine all along. Gabriel's jaw tightened when he said the words impact portfolio out loud. Nor told us to hit the accounts while she hit clinics, and that there was one lever left my father hadn't written on the first page because he knew how people read only the first page. The lever wasn't a threat, it was shame, not crimes but cures, the treatments that came out of studying people like me that never made it to trials because they didn't fit the model. If the public saw those, even their friends would step back. We moved again. The wake protocol kept ticking up. Sophie called from a different hotel with her voice turned down to a whisper and said the people who knocked on her door used the phrase public safety and wore the kind of plain jackets that looked friendly until a handcuff appears from a pocket. I told her to use the routes we'd mapped and to call me every hour. Then we planned a confrontation that couldn't be staged by someone else. A civic forum in Lower Manhattan at lunchtime, open mic, too many cameras and too many exits. Nor made sure the invitations reached the right inboxes so that Arden Cole would arrive with a security smile. I stood at the mic and told the room my name, the street where I live, the hour my door was knocked on, the turnstile wrist that wasn't mine, the vendor IDs that jumped jurisdiction in a way accountants dream about at night. Cole walked in at the moment people who stage things love to walk in. I put the line items on a screen. It's hard to argue with your own filings. He called it entertaining, the way men call you dramatic while they check their watch for the car that's going to pull up outside. Phones started chiming around the room. 7 had finished waking. University groups posted. Clinics posted. A foreign committee posted signatures. The smile on Cole's face held steady, but his eyes didn't. Federal suits arrived, not NYPD, and asked me to step outside. I did, because the cameras were still rolling. A woman in a Navy suit told me I was causing a public safety risk. I told her truth is messy. She said I had an asset they needed returned. I said I wasn't an asset, and the files belonged to the people they lied to. She shifted angles and said my sister was in danger. I said she was in danger because help looks criminal in their hands. Then I told her about the lever she didn't want me to pull. Not her crimes, her cures. I said I could post proof of treatments they shelved because they didn't fit the profit model, and that no one wants to be the team that sat on a cure. Her jaw flexed. That was the conversation we were really having. She asked what I wanted. I said amnesty for anyone pulled into Origin without consent, whistleblower protections that actually protect, independent oversight that isn't on a private payroll, and my father's name cleared. She said I was asking them to indict themselves. I said I was asking them to choose survival. The story wasn't theirs anymore. Pick the ending. It didn't resolve in fireworks. It resolved in paperwork, which is the way most real fights end. Subpoenas, hearings, budgets dragged into light. People who like to call themselves untouchable sitting at tables where public defenders put down folders. They tried once more to frame me as unstable, but doctors declined to play. Months later, a small update appeared on a city site, so quiet you'd miss it if you weren't looking. Rowan, Thomas, cause of death amended, homicide. I printed the page and taped it inside my father's journal under the strip of vellum that woke the world. Sophie came home with a new habit of looking at windows before she sits down. Nor disappeared into the spaces people like her live between, sending a message once in a while that says only, keep it boring and loud. Gabriel bought a plant that should have died and didn't, and we decided, joking and not joking, That maybe hope is a plant you only notice when it refuses to quit. As for me, I kept telling the story, not because I like being looked at, because the people who built shadows still prefer to work inside them, and light is work you have to do every day or the room dims again. I wasn't supposed to survive that Tuesday. I wasn't supposed to wake up in my own bed. I wasn't supposed to press the second button. But the truth about control is simple. It needs your silence more than it needs your consent. When they call you dangerous, remember who taught them to be afraid. It wasn't me. It was the part of the story they couldn't buy, bury, or brand. It was the part that belonged to everyone once the light finally broke.